v.h.s.x? What do you mean?
Alright everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to react and have a discussion about a video from PixelBush titled How Survivor Got Broken and Nobody Noticed. I'm pretty excited to get into this topic because I've been sort of on my soapbox yelling to the heavens basically, like an absolute madman, trying to point out this sort of point that's probably going to be made in this video. How Survivor Got Broken and nobody noticed. It's crazy because, you know, the DBD community does have a knack for trying to kind of gaslight you into thinking that things aren't real and things aren't true when you clearly know they are. And I think it's due to the whole like sort of anecdotal evidence that everybody kind of has their perspectives on, because this game is so randomized, and it's impossible to tie down a perspective or to be able to tie down facts. Because of the fact that there's just so much randomness that goes into it. MMR is also a thing that exists, and everybody has different ways they play, creating all these really unique sort of perspectives on it. But as somebody who has seen sort of all of those sides of the game, like the casuals, we're talking the average, we're talking the high MMR levels, talking about the comp levels and things like that, like just seeing all the aspects of the game, I do think that I'm able to offer, you know, at least a well-rounded perspective on where the game's at. And you know, I try to consistently do my research and try to keep an eye on, you know, different players that are on Survivor and Killer, just to try to get an understanding of where the game's at right now, just to be able to deliver the most well-rounded perspective. But let's get into it here.
The oppressed ones because they got spun or missed a flashlight save one too many times. But there's something interesting about the current period in DBD history that I think merits scrutiny. From my recent experience, Survivor as a role has been very strong for quite some time, but that hasn't tended to translate into a better experience for many Survivor players. Historically, when
So that means that, according to PixelBush, Survivor is objectively overtuned, objectively extremely strong, right? For a good amount of time.
Very strong for quite some time, but that hasn't.
But it doesn't feel that way. Interesting. Which I think it's, when you're talking about the average Survivor, I do think it's, we're talking like solo queues and things like that. Because obviously, you know, you can't pick your teammates in solo queue. You'll probably get a lot of terrible teams. I've already covered a point like this, but just to quickly summarize, solo queue is going to feel a lot worse than Swift and stuff like that, because you have no communication with your team, with that, obviously with those players, and they're also just not very, you know, on average, a lot of players are just not very good at the game. So you're just going to end up getting a lot more rough matches, and it's going to end up feeling like as if the killers are so good, when it's really, it's because your teammates are unable to actually, you know, participate in the match. So it makes it seem like the killer could do more, when in reality, the killers have been getting uppercutted like crazy.
Before we dig into what the secret meta actually is, or how it stayed secret for so long, let's start with the core principle behind everything this video is saying. Survivor is very strong at the moment. If this isn't true, then the entire video's premise falls apart on a base level.
I mean, but we've already proven this point time and time again in every video I think that I've put up at this point, and it's not to create an us versus them, and it's not to you know, villainize any Survivor players or to try to villainize that side. It's mainly just to sort of point out the truths behind just the balancing, and just to understand, like, you know, maybe add a little bit of some perspective to people that do either play both sides or only play Survivor. You can at least see, you know, the perspective that the other side has, to try to get a more varied outlook on the game itself, because, you know, there's a lot of evidence that points in that direction, and anybody who disagrees may need a little bit more information to kind of see that, right? And there's so many varied perspectives when it comes down to a game like this. Like I've said, there's so much anecdotal stuff that we can only even try to guess as to what people are seeing or what people are understanding. It definitely has a lot to do with the casual players, the MMR levels and stuff like that, and the usual metric we go off of is low MMR is going to objectively be more leaning to killer, because of the fact that the survivors are just unable to understand really how to play, how to counter things, and objectively the killer will just be able to do more because there's less gens going off, which therefore means the gate is probably not going to be opened, and obviously their objective is not being completed. If we're talking about average, which means that they have some people that have an understanding of what to do and some people that have an understanding of how to counter things and things like that, you're going to have a much better experience. But obviously it can kind of go either way. Then obviously when you get into the higher MMR, obviously pretty much impossible. It's a clean cut survivor every single way, because at that point every killer's ability is counterable. At that point everything is pretty much as efficient as it possibly can, especially if you are winning a lot. And that obviously ties back into Swifts as well. Like, you usually will see a lot more Swifts in high MMR because they're winning a lot, so they'll end up moving all the way up. And that is usually how it goes, right? So there's like at least 3 divisions on average of how the game is going to be. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are in casuals, or that only play Survivor and then load up Killer and say, oh, I can get a 4K without tunneling or camping. And it's like, yeah, you just loaded up a character you'd never played for the first time. Like, you're obviously going to go against other players that are also beginners. Like, that obviously makes logical sense, but a lot of people are just unable to understand or even fathom that possibility. But tying it back into this, Survivor objectively is the stronger side between the two, despite the fact that killers are the ones with superpowers. Make it make sense. That's DBD for you.
So let me start by asking an important question. When did DBD start getting survivor-sided again? Obviously, in the olden days, DBD was very survivor-sided and remained that way for years until SIP 1.0 dropped, alongside a slew of powerful regression perks, and DBD became truly killer-sided for the first time ever. This was the age of Chess Merchant, of the Call of Brine Eruption Jane Kick meta, and Pain Res DMS at full strength. When Circle of Healing was nerfed, there was a short time where Killer was unquestionably top dog. But behaviour was swift to act, and with nerfs to Call of Brine, Pain Resonance and Eruption, the game entered the most balanced state it's ever been in. Sure, we've had some outlier perks like Made for This for a few months and Thrill of the Hunt for about a week.
Yeah, Made for This was ridiculous. And as for, yeah, I actually had spoken about Thrill of the Hunt. That Thrill of the Hunt barely had a chance to shine. I've been saying that for ages as well. The whole totem meta had began and ended within a week, and that I had used to sort of display that the devs really just are very leaning to a side that's not killer. That's all I had to say on that, because if you're really going off of just generalization, Made for This lasted for months, Thrill the Hunt lasted for a week. What does that tell you, right? If you go in that route. Obviously, back then when Made for This was at its peak, I don't think they were really as quick to update things as they are nowadays compared to the Thrill of the Hunt. But if you were trying to create that argument, there you go, that point does exist. And obviously the counter is, obviously they weren't really as adamant to patch things back then than they are now.
But importantly, both sides had access to these outliers at different moments. Everybody had a little bit of bullshit for a short period as a treat until it got nerfed. But starting around or just after the 8th anniversary, I started to notice a worrying trend where, regardless of the balance of individual perks, the base game was starting to twist in favour of survivors and killers were struggling to keep up. Nothing I think showcases this quite on the level of 70-second hook stages. It was an
Yep, thank you PixelBush. I'm glad that you brought that up for us. This is one of the biggest things that I'd like to bring up when we're talking about the killer versus survivor. Which side is it? And the hook timer, which I've actually covered this in a different video with Oddstarva, talking about it as well. He mentions it. That additional 10 seconds, essentially a base kit reassurance, literally has prevented people from getting kills time and time infinitely since it's dropped. And it hurts, like, your pressure when you're unable to just get that extra hook state, because of the fact that that's an extra 10 seconds preventing them from reaching second state. That's an entire hook state that you now have to get from scratch, which means if you're playing a lower tier killer like Skull Merchant or Ghostface, Trapper, like, you're going to have to completely from scratch probably have to down them again and then get that extra hook. But you know, there's nothing like that for Survivor, right? there isn't an increased, you know, time to complete gens after one gen gets done or anything like that that can be on the same level as getting a drain timer increase. Like, you don't have an increased regression after kicking a gen or anything like that in the base kit that equates to this. So this in itself was one of the main things that I would point out when we're talking about this topic, is they're objectively giving another second chance within the base kit on top of the fact that they already have the base kit borrow time, and they already have a lot of perks that were also just buffed, you know, that could be stacked on top of the base kit borrow time, like babysitter or borrow time, right? That gives you an additional 10 seconds of endurance and speed. So you get 20 seconds total.
Innocuous enough change, slipped in on the Castlevania chapter patch like it was the most normal thing in the world, but it completely upended time efficiency for everybody in every match of DBD. Now a prospective unhooker has 10 free seconds to spend on generators to get in that reset before they need to go up for the unhook, 20 extra seconds per survivor of guaranteed safety on the hook, and smart survivors will wait to the end of the stage to get the pull, and they'll make you feel those extra seconds. We took a game where time efficiency is the most important thing and gave the survivor team an extra 80 seconds to work with. That's almost a whole extra gen of time they just got for free, without any acknowledgement of how powerful this was and without any compensation for the other side.
Thank you, PixelBush, for once again articulating the exact point that I was making. And that right there is a lot of time. You know, think about it this way. I mean, we have Eruption that has a 10% within that, right? That's 10 seconds of the gen. And we need to both kick the gen and then find a survivor, potentially hit them twice and then down them. By the time you do that, you're probably only going to shave off maybe half of the time they put into it. And then that'll be replenished the second that you walk over there. Just to kind of give you an idea of how the math works. Because we have to keep in mind that if this game is focused on efficiency, picking up and finding a hook and walking from that hook to the next point and getting a hit and then going over after that person, getting it down again, all is a lot of time that takes for killers without map traversal and things like that. So adding additional time on top of the fact that the gen speed already is very fast, just off of its existence, because it's literally a second that passes, is 1% of the generator. So if we're adding, that's 20% of a gen per hook, right? So that's over, that's 80% of a gen. That's 80% of gen speed, like just added on top for free, pretty much. And the thing is that it obviously doesn't really matter much when the players that are inexperienced don't really understand how that time works. But obviously when you're going against the advanced to the highest MMRs and stuff, like, you're going to find players that can absolutely use that extra time, guaranteeing them extra hook states, guaranteeing them you know, more time and stuff like that.
In the developer update that came with the chapter, the devs said that this was meant as compensation for the extra 10 seconds that generators took to complete after 6.1.0, which is an explanation that doesn't really fly with me, but we'll get into that later when we talk about perks. 70-second stages are, in my opinion, the biggest base game changes that pushed this game in favour of the survivors, but it wasn't the only one. The Mangled nerf I don't think gets talked about enough. For those who don't know, Mangled used to apply its heal speed debuff indefinitely from when you were hit and was only removed when you became healthy. But in March last year, Mangled got changed so that it lasts for a fixed amount of time after the hit is applied, and wears off after that.
Thank you, PixelBush, again. This is another point that I've also mentioned quite a bit in my own videos. Like, the healing meta is at its peak at the moment. Obviously, like I've said, they've updated a lot of perks that were perfectly fine that had to do with healing speed, such as Resurgence, which gives you 70% healing speed, 70% healing progression off of being unhooked, right? Then we have Botany Knowledge that removed its 20% increased medkit usage. They also buffed other perks like similarly, right? Like Empathic Connection and things like that. Other perks that involved a lot of healing stuff. So that already incentivized a lot of people to put on healing builds and healing perks. And on top of that, we'll make it, which also is a free perk. You don't have to buy that. So it's in the base game, and then you could slap that on with people with Resurgence, and there they go. They're insta-healed on their hooks. And because of the fact that they nerfed the Mangled status effect, so it's a limited duration, people that put on Vigil, which is another perk that should have been nerfed a long time ago, that also got buffed for no reason, is also reduced. So you have a duration that is affected by Vigil, and on top of that, it's a duration in general. And on top of that, you have perks and other things like that that completely invalidate the entire Mangled effect, and you pretty much just completely destroyed one of the options that killers have in terms of builds and actually trying to create pressure. So,
which instantly made most sources of Mangled completely useless, because now if a killer hits and runs, you can just sit on gens while you wait it out, and your time efficiency isn't affected at all. This is so much worse when you realise the Mangled timer doesn't pause when you're on the ground or on the hook, meaning that by the time you're unhooked and able to be healed, there's a good chance that the Mangled from the hit that downed you has already worn off. The change obviously cripples Sloppy Butcher, which was a commonly used killer perk before the change, but sees almost no play now. But suddenly every killer who has a Mangled add-on suddenly has a useless add-on slot now. Destiny got it worse than anybody. The poor guy had 2 Mangled add-ons that just became cosmetic add-on slots after this change, on a killer who already had some of the worst add-ons in Dead by Daylight.
I do want to also add on to the Deathslinger nerf, and one of the thing is besides the fact that you already have 2 add-ons that already got gutted on a character that's already low tier, but on top of that, they also reduced the time it took to recover from the deep wound effect, which also affects Deathslinger, because it went from 12 seconds to I think 10 seconds. So, and Deathslinger's one of his powers is literally breaking the chain off of a survivor, and it puts them in deep wound, and they can just recover from deep wound faster now. So, you know, Deathslinger's been getting kind of getting punched in the stomach and swirlied and thrown in the lockers pretty much like constantly at this point, on top of the invisible walls and things like that. So, you know, shambles for my boy, you know what I mean? I stopped playing him.
This change was done to open up design space for future anti-healing perks without risking it stacking with Mangled, but we're over a year on now and there's been no sign of that design space being used. Is the anti-healing in the room with us? The closest that we've ever come to new design space being explored since then is No Quarter, which is one of the worst perks in the entire game. And yes, before anyone says anything, I know Leverage also got reworked recently, and it's definitely more useful now than it was before, but it's got so many terms and conditions attached to it that it's proven very hard to slot into builds. First of all, attaching anti-healing to hook actions gets awkward when the killers who inarguably need anti-healing the most are slugging killers like Twins or hit-and-run killers like Wraith, neither of which are going to be hooking you as much as other killers and will be less able to proc Leverage in the course of regular gameplay. It also means Leverage eats shit to anti-tunnel perks because they give the survivors effectively an extra health state off the hook that will protect them anyway until Leverage wears off, and it eats shit to Resurgence too, one of the most common healing perks in the game these days. And this is all for a perk that's ultimately just reverse Will Make It, with a third of the duration of Will Make It.
And there you have it. Thank you once again, PixelBush, for giving us the most concise and perfect way I couldn't have said it better myself. I didn't even conceive the idea that this was the opposite Will Make It, and it doesn't even directly counter it because it only cuts off the healing speed by 50% and the duration is only for tier 1 on Will Make It. And on top of the fact that this perk is a perk for a, you know, is a paid perk for a killer that nobody plays. So even that in itself is a bad idea. There's really no direct counter for stuff like the healing meta, especially when this exists. And the thing with killer is that it requires you to stack on multiple perks for it to counter 1 perk or to counter 2 perks. Killer requires 3 to 4 to counter Will Make It once. That could be equipped to multiple people. It's just not the same thing. Like, it doesn't make any sense, and it's just not the same thing. And arguably the only thing that I would say is maybe change it so you can't stack healing speeds. Just make it so that it's like it sort of overrides depending on the value that's higher. So if we have Will Make It, it overrides, say, Empathic Connection or Botany. Instead of it being 150%, it just remains 100%. I think that would solve the problem with the insane healing speed on Survivor, arguably, because Mangled and Vigil and other things like that against Vigil that pretty much is non-existent, especially as well as being on the hook reduces your timer anyway. It doesn't pause the timer for the Mangled and and the everything else, it wears off. So it's like, why not just remove that ability to stack those things?
And without the stackability that All-Make-It has with other healing steroids like medkits, or just a teammate. The only way you can stack leverage up to beat Survivor reset perks is if you run it with Gift of Pain to counter resurgence and further slow immediate resets down with Mangled right off the hook. But now you're dedicating half your build to anti-healing that still isn't going to work in hit and run or slugging situations, that still eat shit to anti-tunnel perks, and auto resets like Second Wind and Plot Twist. And in the worst case scenario, the leverage debuff is only 30 seconds. You can still wait it out easily. May I remind you, by the way, that this has come alongside a dozen buffs in the past 2 years.
Thank you. I'm glad that we have more perks that I always forget to mention. I always mention Resurgence and Empathic Connection and Botany, but I always forget about Autodidact, No One Left Behind, Desperate Measures, Built to Last, Streetwise, Solidarity, We're Gonna Live Forever. Like, golly, Buckle Up too. I forgot about those perks. And arguably even made for this though, because you can get a bonus endurance for healing someone. So, yeah, I mean, pharmacy as well. Golly, man.
Years to healing or medkit perks, introduction of new healing perks in Do No Harm and Strength in Shadows, and the nerf to Franklin's that prevents it from draining medkit charges. Opening new design space, indeed. To keep up with the changing pace, and to their credit, Behaviour has been trying to do this. In the last year or two, we've seen buffs to Knight, Freddy, Singularity, Clown, Vecna, Legion, Huntress, and even stronger killers like Pyramid Head.
I just wish that in that list that Ghostface would finally get his buff, because like he's been in the C, no, not even, he's been in the D tiers for years. But I will say that I am happy that some of those, like, in those lists were pretty bad characters, or characters that were kind of meh, like, that are able to get better. So those are good things, obviously.
Trying to keep them up to date. But these largely haven't done the job of keeping these killers viable in an increasingly hostile environment, and the big reason for that is how they chose to buff them. Most of the time when Behaviour winds up buffing killers these days, they don't tend to increase their effectiveness ceiling by letting them do things they couldn't do before. Instead, they raise the effectiveness floor by making the killer easier to get value from at a baseline level.
Ah, that's an extremely interesting point. I never even thought about that. And what comes to mind is Singularity. Like, Singularity was a character that I think was very clunky and difficult to use, and the buff to Singularity was ultimately just to make it easier to just play the character in general, but not necessarily to change the strength of the character. And in turn, it did make them stronger, but it also was mainly focused on just making the quality of life a lot better. And I think that that's 100% true. But I don't think that Singularity's rankings really moved much at all, but I do think that they still stayed strong, but I do think that they're easier to use. That's a very good point. It's a very good point.
There's no better example of this in the recent Clown changes. Clown recently got a bunch of changes to make his haste bottles more appealing to use, and the way that some people are going on about Clown after his live release, you'd think he was some A to S tier monstrosity destroying lobbies left and right.
That's the funny thing about the Clown changes, is that Clown is still not in like an S tier by any means, but he's a pub stomper, and he's sort of following in the steps of Kenneki, where they're able to hard counter a lot of the whole W, a lot of the pre-dropping and things like that. And that's one of the main things that a lot of survivors are obsessed with doing, is ultimately just holding W, pre-dropping, popping an exhaustion perk, and trying to do all of that instead of looping, which the Clown directly is countering. Now, my distaste for the Clown buffs was obviously the fact that you're taking away the Clown sort of depth that a lot of the killer players are not engaging in, which is ultimately using both the pinks and yellows in conjunction to be able to counteract a lot of the tiles when tiles are dropped. And in turn, it's not necessarily even a buff per se, it's more of a side grade to just basically do the inverse of what it used to do, which obviously everyone was just obsessed with the pinks, and in turn we're not trying to use the yellows at all. And I use Airnet as an example as well, that's how Clown should be played. Like, it's a character that has a lot of depth and can be very good if you actually take the time out to learn it. But even then, you know, there's really just going to be not a lot of people that want to engage with that. regardless if they decide to play the game consistently or not.
He definitely feels worse to play against as Survivor, that much is beyond question, but that doesn't mean he's meaningfully stronger than he was before. All of the weaknesses that he had before, like pre-dropping pallets and pre-running before he gets to you, he still has all those weaknesses. Those were the bottlenecks with his power design, and that's why Survivor players who are halfway intelligent, Aranad, that guy who wrote the 200-page clown guide, agrees with me on this front. The killer is about as strong as he was before, but using yellows effectively got made significantly easier. This, to put in that time to play like he does, which is why lowering the skill floor of yellow bottles irks me so much, because if players are still able to get decent results without putting that level of work and learning in, why would they ever bother to put that level of work and learning in?
That was my point when I was talking about the clown changes, is the fact that because it's just so simple to just drop yellow and keep moving, they don't even have to even take the time to learn what makes clown so interesting and what makes clown so engaging. And because of these changes, it just basically made clown even more brainless than it was before. You know what I mean? And that in itself is not something that I've agreed with, and I'm somebody who enjoys playing killer, and I'm like, damn, like that one of my favorite things about it is learning and improving at the characters and trying to focus on doing that. So the fact that it just isn't there is insane.
You could put in 100% effort to learn clown like Aranad did, and do pretty well with this fairly weak killer. Or you could put in a quarter of that, 25%, and do decently by just spamming yellows over and over again with Subway Surfers playing on your other monitor. And the recent spree of clown changes helped the guy playing at 25% way more than the guy playing at 100%. This has been for the most part, they're just getting easier. This wouldn't inherently be a problem if the same thing was happening to Survivor. I mean, losing out skill expression and rewarding the bare minimum is an issue in and of itself, but at least if it was happening to both sides, we'd all be in the same boat here. But for Survivor, that's not been the case so much. Granted, there has been some stuff that's reduced the skill expression needed to play Survivor, most notably making flashlight saves easier to land.
Thank you. This is another thing that I've heard a lot when we talk about balancing with this game, is the fact that they made it so that it's easier to blind the killers when they pick up the survivor off the ground. And then it says survivor nerf added blind immunity to whenever a killer grabs a survivor from a locker, but that doesn't work if they're doing the slow vault animation out of the locker. I mean, it's not a vault, but a slow animation, and you grab them, you can still be blinded from that. Which is what I was trying to, which I don't have an example to show here, but either way.
But for the most part, Survivor is more challenging to play than it was last time Survivor was far and away the strongest thing in the game. And that's where we're going to be starting to talk about perks, which in my opinion are the biggest sources of disparity between the balance and perception of balance in the Survivor role. Let's look at pre-6.1.0 DBD. Survivors unquestionably ruled the roost pretty much all of that time, and due to how stagnant the meta was back then, you tended to see mostly the same perks. Dead Hard, DS, Unbreakable, Borrowed Time, Adrenaline, maybe Spine Chill Resi if they were watching too many JRM videos, and Circle of Healing once that came out. These perks have a lot in common with each other. They were all extremely powerful, useful against every killer in the game, and were extremely easy to get value out of consistently. These were Payday, Windows Opportunity had a 30-second cooldown after vaulting.
Why doesn't Windows of Opportunity still have a cooldown after vaulting? Why did they ever change that? Why wasn't this, bring it back to this. This would be way more balanced. What the hell? Yo, what are we talking about right now?
Off the record only hid your aura and didn't give you endurance.
Wait, why isn't Off the Record also do that as well? Hello? What the heck? And then Babysitter, it says that
Babysitter used to only reveal the aura for half its duration and didn't give the survivor any haste at all. Serve perks were atrocious back in the day. But
why
for the past several years,
haven't they reverted it to that though? They already buffed up a bunch of other stuff that was perfectly fine to use in conjunction with these perks, and it would compensate. But yet, no. Let's just what? I don't know.
Being a continuous stream of new powerful survivor perks that occasionally go a little crazy. Dead Hard, DS, Adrenaline, and even Circle of Healing have all been nerfed, but are still solid choices. But they have so much more competition now. Do you want an altruistic healing build with the buffed up autodidact and solidarity? Or if all else fails, you can put on hyperfocus, stakeout and a BNP, power through generators at the speed of sound, and still have room for windows and an exhaustion perk. Survivors have a vast amount of perk diversity compared to a few years ago, and that's a wonderful thing.
That in itself, of course, is fine and all, and that's why I was saying why not revert those perks back to the originals, because there's so many options for other things in this game. I do think that if we decide to utilize the same philosophy that they've been applying to killers for day in and day out, of, oh, these perks are being used a lot, let's nerf them so that they use the other ones, then why not nerf the ones that are the highest pick rates to the originals, which were way more skill expressive, and then keep the rest, I guess, where it's at the moment, and go from there. That would completely shift over to what people actually want to do with those builds and create a much more unique gameplay loop. But that's just me, right? And the thing is that unfortunately, killer is not like this. I don't really imagine that the build sort of expressiveness is even comes close, especially because of the fact that there's just simply is not a lot of options when you are playing low tiers. I do think that the higher tiers are much more able to actually have a little more flexibility when it comes down to build uniqueness, but definitely not even close to Survivor when it comes down to the low tiers. They're pretty much locked in with 2 slowdowns minimum, maybe 3, and you have to run chase perks, or you have to run aura, or something like that, just so you at least have a fighting chance. And that is my biggest issue with the balancing.
I am really glad behaviour has increased the pool of viable Survivor perks over time, because it makes the role more replayable and interesting for both sides. But it has definitely caused some damage in the relationship between balance and the perception of balance, because when everybody ran the same few perks, everyone kind of knew what to expect in a match on both sides. But now it's kind of the Wild West, and many Survivor players don't know how to handle that. They want to try out the new healing perks or the new anti-slug build with Conviction, Soul Guard or whatever, but what happens when the killer realises that you're resetting in a split second and decides to counter it by relentlessly tunneling the shit out of you before you can get your heal off? What happens when the killer spots your teammate lollygagging around with background player last down waiting to get that window save, and starts slugging you to chase them instead, and you put on anti-tunnel instead of anti-slug? It could feel like you get punished for not bringing the right perks for the right situation because you wanted to bring something else instead, which can feel bad in the moment even if it's not strictly unfair. It's why I always take the claims of tunneling has never been worse, behaviour needs to add more basekit anti-tunnel mechanics, with a heavy grain of salt, because survivors have so many options now to protect themselves from tunneling or slugging or whatever other evil strategy the killers are going to use.
That's what the craziest thing about the whole survivor and killer arguments that come into play is. They're like, oh, we need more basekit things, more basekit buffs, and it's like, but what about all the perks you're refusing to use? Like, you can easily just swap. Like, we already have, like, I think new presets now. If you're finding that you're in a weird time where you're finding a lot of the same type of matches, or you're finding the same kind of playstyle, then just swap over to your new preset. Like, these perks exist for a reason, and they just actively choose not to use them. So it's like you really have, like, at the same time too, it kind of, I mean, we can bring out the skill issue meme here too. I mean, if if the whole point is to buy your teammates time, and if you're going down instantly, that might possibly be an issue either from your teammates not leaving any resources around, or it could obviously be your own skill level where you're just unable to hold your own in chases.
Tunneling was that prevalent, if tunneling was that problematic, you'd be running DS or OTR or Blood Rush or something to help you out in the situations, just like we used to run Borrowed Time back in the day. But I don't see these sorts of perks anywhere near as often as I should, or as often as I hear folks complaining about the situations those perks prevent. And no, Dead Hard does not count as anti-tunnel if you can't land it. Survivors having a flatter spread of useful perks is a double-edged sword, because it means that you have a ton of powerful options, but that also means that it sucks when you pick the wrong ones and get punished for it, or when your teammates pick the wrong ones and you suffer for it. You might think it's not fun to get tunneled for bringing healing perks or slugged because your teammate's a background player, and that is fair enough. but I'd rather be in that environment than the one that killers are in. We've had to run gen control perks for as long as gen control perks have been a thing in this game. Most killers in this game don't have a hope in hell against the really good survivors like dedicating half their build to generator defense. We'd kill for the level of diversity and viable perks and builds that survivors get to have. If we have to deal with corrupt basically being tattooed into our build slots, then I'm sure that the average survivor can handle having to run off the record instead of hope or that third healing perk or something.
That's exactly the point I was making earlier, is just the mere fact that you're just really unable to not bring some form of slowdown. The gens are incredibly fast, and if you decide to play something that's not from B up, you know, in terms of tiers, then what are you gonna do? You're just kind of forced into a situation where you're really unable to not bring slowdown. And that applies to a majority of the killer players, right? Like in terms of killer choice, I should say. You know, I've heard that from people from all sorts of different play times and things like that. They end up usually experiencing a lot of very quick gens. I've even seen that with characters that killers I don't even play. I've seen that gens are incredibly quick as compared to how where it used to be, where I can play a new killer that I don't really know how to play. Gens would be way slower compared to when I was going with my mains, right? Like when I have like way more hours on, like a couple thousand hours on that one killer, would have way more gen speed, way more second chances, way more all these other things going off compared to that lower tier killer with that lower level of MMR. And I would even see that nowadays with people that are starting out lower hours and things like that. All across the board now, the gens have been incredibly quick, so it's like you're kind of in a situation where you can't really run anything else. And that's just unfortunately the issue, you know? But I will say, if you want to watch the rest of the video, it'll be linked in the description. Shout out once again to PixelBush for bringing up a lot of fantastic points. There is a full other half of this video where they cover where PixelBush is covering a lot of other parts of the discussion, and I think anybody watching this will really enjoy listening to that. But check out the original video, and while you're down there, support the channel with the links in the description. Consider following on Twitch to watch me play Killer live. Maybe follow on TikTok for more content, and consider becoming a member or joining the Patreon, subbing on YouTube, stuff like that. Support the channel. I'll see you guys in the next video.